And I'll introduce Kate Harry, who will introduce Ed Hudgens.
I'm here to double introduce a man who needs no introduction. Ed Hudgens actually is the perfect person to fill in for Stephen Moore of the Wall Street Journal because Ed actually wrote most of the article, so it's very convenient.
Thank you very much, Kate. I do want to give Steve Moore, my friend Steve Moore, his due. He is a fan of Atlas Shrugged, and he emailed me late last year, early this year, I forget which, and said, Ed, you always had a particular phrase or a particular thing you like to quote out of Atlas Shrugged, something about the President of the United States. I said, oh yeah, that was the thing where John Galt has been captured, and the president said, I will make you, I'll put this on here, there we go. I will make you the economic dictator, and you can do anything you want. The economy's yours. And John Galt says, fine, start by getting rid of all your income taxes, your taxes. And Mr. Thompson said, no, we couldn't do that. I mean, how would we pay our government employees? And John Galt says, fire all your government employees. And Steve was always taken by that phrase, but he basically said, I'm looking at all of the parallels between Atlas Shrugged and what's happening in the world today. And I sent him an email with some of the specifics, and I want to give Steve his due. He did a really good job and filled in a lot of it himself. He did interview David Kelly. But it really is extraordinary when a novel that was published 5 decades before is again a bestseller, and it's extraordinary when the events depicted in that novel seem to leap off the pages of the novels and into the real world today. And it's extraordinary when the novel's title and characters are featured on anti-government signs at protests from coast to coast. And it's, of course, extraordinary when a novel launches an entire new philosophy. Atlas Shrugged, of course, is that novel, and it's appropriate at this conference that we reflect a little bit on Atlas Shrugged, and which is what we've been doing pretty much most of the conference anyway. And I'm going to really do 2 things today. First thing I'm going to do is, and most of the talk will be, looking at why the novel is so popular today, unfortunately, because of a lot of bad things. And second, I'm going to talk a little bit about how Atlas Shrugged can help us make a better world. So that's my agenda for today. So the first part, the big chunk, is Atlas in the world today. Now, I'll start this discussion about Atlas in the world today by noting that the economic and political situations that I'll describe, of course, didn't start out with Barack Obama and the Democrats, or even with George W. Bush, even though it was the 2 of them who, of course, have launched the current crisis. One of Rand's great insights in Atlas Shrugged is that politics and economics are simply a reflection of deeper moral and philosophical factors. And that's certainly what we see in the world today. Now, let's go ahead and I'm going to look at Atlas in the world today, and I'm going to kind of look at 3 big topics. I'm going to look at the economic carnage, I'm going to look at the moral carnage, and I'm going to look at evasion of reality. Those are kind of the 3 things I'm doing under the world today. And first, the economic carnage. What, of course, has caught most people's attention about the novel is just how close it seems to come in describing what's going on today in the world, what our politicians are doing, what kind of economic policies they're pursuing. And I'll start by talking about some of those policies, and their effects. And this is such a big topic. I mean, how I'm going to fit it in 30 minutes, I don't know. There are so many analogies. Of course, obviously in Atlas Shrugged, you see government taking more and more control, if not outright ownership, of companies. And that's what you see today. Of course, the government taking control of banks, auto companies, and the like. But of course, it goes on from there. In Atlas Shrugged, you see regulations hindering the most productive people and most productive industries in society. And of course, often in the name of helping one group at the expense of another. They don't say the expense of the other part, often to create jobs. And of course, we've seen that over many decades and accelerating today. Today's manifestation of it is green mandates that cripple industries even more in the name of creating jobs. And what's interesting is even as the auto companies are on the ropes because of a lot of these mandates and regulations, now the government is going to have is going to mandate higher fuel economy that will add yet more costs to producing the cars of the auto companies that they have helped crippled, that they're now saying that they want to save. You get the point. In Atlas, we see a downward spiral as one bad economic policy spawns yet another bad economic policy. In Atlas, for example, the banker Eugene Lawson does loans based on need, of course, destroying much of the state of Wisconsin in the process. The current crisis, of course, was a combination of government policies and private, what you might call private altruism. It was triggered in part when Barney Frank, Representative Barney Frank, Senator Chris Dodd, the Federal Reserve, banking regulators, and through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, two agencies, banking agencies set up by the federal government, essentially strong-armed banks into making loans based on what? On need, of course. The idea was that there's certain people who need a new home, and therefore all of those pesky requirements, for example, that, that people who want to borrow money actually be able to make a down payment. Well, you know, that's discrimination. We don't want that sort of thing. So among the regulations, for example, instead of treating welfare payments to someone who was trying to borrow money to buy a house, instead of treating welfare payments as an indication that these people couldn't afford to buy a house, they had to treat welfare payments as income and an indication that they could buy a house. And I could go down. Again, I've written about this and for a long time, and that's the kind of nonsense you had. There was a New York Times article in 1999 with that same Barney Frank, you know, being proud of his efforts to strong-arm, to force Fannie and Freddie to make these kinds of loans. Of course, Frank for years helped block attempts to bring a more market-based standards to lending. And then when everything collapsed, he angrily denied that he was doing that. And there was the dirty, greedy bankers that were doing it. And you watch him on some of the talk shows, just livid and angry and so forth. Well, it's interesting that I've got an article here from, let's see, where is this? June 22nd, 2009. By the way, I'm giving this talk July 5th, 2009. Of that same Barney Frank going to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and saying, you really have to loosen the loan requirements to finance people who want to buy certain condos. I mean, it's happening right in front of us with these guys. And you see how the downward spiral works. The government creates the problem and then has to try to make up for the problem, which creates an even bigger problem. This is how you get an Atlas Shrugged, you know, Regulation 10-289. You see one enterprise in Atlas Shrugged ruined by attempts to help other enterprises. That's certainly a major theme. In some cases, it's the private consortia, the anti-dog-eat-dog rule that the Taggart Transcontinental tried to use to ruin competitor Dan Conway, or the Railroad Stabilization Plan. Or is it the Railroad Recovery? See, I can't keep the terminology straight between Atlas Shrugged and what the Clinton and what the Bush and Obama administration is doing. It all gets mixed up in my head because the terminology is so similar, which is why people have noticed this. But you see that sort of thing in Atlas Shrugged. For example, helping Taggart Transcontinental with a plan that in fact destroys Taggart Transcontinental's competitors. This is what you have, for example, with the federal government helping General Motors and Chrysler with all sorts of bailouts. And who's going to be hurt? Ford Motor Company, that's actually managing to survive without government regulation or without government handouts, at least at the moment. You see the politicization of production. In Atlas Shrugged, a politically connected Mal Chalmers uses the government to divert railroad cars in order to transport soybeans because she thinks that soybeans are more important than other things that are being shipped. Today you see green mandates on companies, especially, for example, the auto companies. Mandates that the auto companies produce certain kind of cars that don't tend to be very profitable for those companies that the government has to bail out because they're being forced to sell cars that aren't very profitable. And what's interesting is that the government now has to pay people to buy those green cars that are much more expensive, and the government has a program to buy up the so-called clunkers. That is, people's cars that are perfectly respectable and still work, but if we just pay you to ditch your old clunker and go buy one of these cars that other people don't want to buy, I mean, isn't that like something right out of Atlas Shrugged? Politicized production. Okay, another thing right out of Atlas Shrugged is the tearing up of traditional private property rights. In Atlas Shrugged, for example, the government backs a moratorium on bond payments in order to help, in that particular case, Taggart Transcontinental. Or even better, they strong-arm Hank Reardon into giving up the patent to his steel. Well, today what you found is that certain investors bought preferred stock for a higher price, okay, because if a company went bankrupt, they would be first in line to get some recovery on the stock that they bought. That's why they paid extra early on. What has happened is the Obama administration has outright threatened traders, hedge fund traders and others who are managing these portfolios that they would ruin them in the press and with any government power that they could if they didn't surrender those rights to their property that they had in fact purchased at a higher price. And you've got on record, and one of our trustees actually had an open letter about this, on just how the government is using straight out extortion tactics and saying, we're going to crush you. You see that sort of thing, tearing up traditional property rights in Atlas, and you see it with this administration today. You see the politicization of industries, not only through traditional lobbying, but even worse. Of course, traditional lobbying, I point out that a guy named Franklin Raines, who was the head of, I believe it was Fannie Mae, gave out tons of lobbying money, and the biggest recipients were Barney Frank, Chris Dodd, and Barack Obama, to protect their unsound lending practices from other congressmen and senators who wanted to force Fannie and Freddie to tighten things up. Raines, after destroying the agency, or the so-called bank that he ran, became an advisor to Barack Obama. Which again reminds you of Eugene Lawson in Atlas Shrugged, who, after he ruins his own bank and ruins his own part of the country, right, is made a top economic advisor in Washington. Of course, that's where they're going to go, right? Or in Atlas Shrugged, you see Cuffy Meggs, an outright thug, as a government advisor to Taggart Transcontinental, who's actually making shady deals with his friends for his friends left and right. Today you see Obama placing in positions in the industries that they have essentially bought his political friends and cronies so that they can force those companies to follow policies that are friendly to Barack Obama's union supporters, Barack Obama's eco-cult supporters, and the like. Again, the politicization of industries. You see the downright hypocrisy today that is, of course, pictured in Atlas Shrugged. In Atlas Shrugged, you always have these liberals, I use that term in quotation marks here, those liberals at parties and so forth and enjoying all the luxuries, talking about the poor and the needy and denouncing greed. And what do you see today that's something out of Atlas Shrugged? Well, of course, you see Al Gore with his mansion, denouncing people who don't live green lives and who don't go back to nature. And you probably saw the study that showed that he used, I forget how many, 10 or 15 times more energy in his mansion than the average person in the country uses. Or you see Nancy Pelosi, you know, the Speaker of the House in Congress, demanding more use of military jets to fly her around. There was a story just out on how money for congressional junkets has gone up and up and up in this administration. So, and again, I could spend all day just literally going down particular examples in Atlas Shrugged and pointing out what's happened today. But I want to go to a second thing about the economic carnage, what I call the Starnesville phenomenon. Now, you'll remember in Atlas Shrugged, Dagny Taggart and Hank Rearden visit what was once a prosperous industrial city, Starnesville, that was that its anchor business was, of course, 20th Century Motors, an auto company. That city had been reduced to hovels. Detroit has been declining for years because of its policies of welfare for the unproductive, high taxes on the productive, and of course not having much money left over to combat the rampant crime in that terrible city. Well, now that the auto industries are pretty much on the way out, you've seen a proposal by, the name is slipping my mind right now, someone who's, oh, by the way, also becoming a Barack Obama advisor, to literally bulldoze big parts of the city of Detroit and simply make it into rural land again. You know, with little urban islands still popping out. That's an actual plan that you may see in the next couple of years. Doesn't that sound like something out of Atlas Shrugged? And if you go to some of our industrialized cities, you see that. Whenever I go up the East Coast on Amtrak, which I'm for privatizing, by the way, through Baltimore, the city of Baltimore, you see these blocks and blocks of old row houses. It used to be beautiful old row houses boarded up. As you know, the city of Baltimore declines. St. Louis, I could go down the examples. And again, it's like something out of Atlas Shrugged. This is what I call the Starnesville effect. And of course, the guy who helped do all that, the banker Eugene Lawson, gets a government job, needless to say. Atlas Shrugging, of course, is the theme of the book. And of course, you see that sort of thing today. There's more discussion today about Obamonomics driving out productive people, driving productive people into retirement. For a number of years, and now accelerating, we have seen doctor shortages springing up. I wrote a couple of years ago a piece called Doctors Shrug, and it was about how government regulations and the fact that the government allows nuisance lawsuits has simply driven a lot of doctors out of business. Or they've retired early. I've talked to a lot of doctors who have been associated with our organization, the Atlas Society, who have told me, look, I'm in my 50s, I'm at the height of my career, I love my work, you know, height of my skill. I've had it. You know, I've had it with a government that literally is looking to throw us in jail and has thrown doctors in jail for making paperwork mistakes in the incomprehensible mess that's Medicare and Medicaid. And of course, we're going to see that sort of thing accelerate with Obama's medical or healthcare nationalization. You've seen in recent years, of course, businesses fleeing from high tax, high regulatory states to ones that are relatively better off. For example, Californians continue to flee from Arizona, or from California to Arizona and Nevada. I met with one of our donors a month or so ago, and he said, it's getting very hard for me. I'm a local business. I rely on local customers, and most of them are simply moving to Arizona and Nevada to avoid the mess that's in California. This sort of thing. You find, I had a great example here of in the state of Maryland. This was from just about a month or so ago. Millionaires flee Maryland taxes. Maryland is one of the most liberal, rabidly liberal states in the country, I'm sorry to say. But here's an article about how most of the millionaires, or a lot of the millionaires in Maryland, are simply moving to other states because they're sick of the high taxes in that state. Other examples. Oh, and a very important other example is you've seen in the last number of years more and more tax flight as people with money try to take their money to other countries. And that's why Obama has launched, and the leaders, the Euro socialist leaders, have launched a major attack on so-called tax havens, especially Switzerland. Why? Well, the reason is quite obvious, that you can't allow, if you're a vampire, you can't allow your source of blood to escape. And that's what they're doing. And of course, what these leaders want to do is they want to harmonize taxes and regulations, meaning make it impossible for people to escape anywhere. So that's the economic carnage and the analogies. I want to say a word about the moral carnage, because as you know, in Atlas Shrugged, Rand shows that these bad economic and policies and the politics behind it are really based on faulty morality. Now, you see the rhetoric in the villains in Atlas Shrugged, of course, is all anti-greed. That's the big buzzword. That's the thing that they hate. And sadly, during the last campaign, both Obama and McCain were in complete agreement. The cause of the current economic problems was greed, people who just wanted too much. Now, you hear pandering politicians saying this kind of thing all the time, but I think there was a difference. John McCain was kind of a befuddled, confused old guy who never quite had any principles anyway, and sometimes he was good on pork barrel spending, but he was bad on a lot of other things. And he often used the word greed to mean someone who's doing something is cheating, and well, that's not really greed, that's just plain cheating. But Obama is much more serious in his collectivism and his self-sacrifice, and urging that as the basis of a civil society rather than individual liberty and fulfillment. For example, he spoke in May of 2008 to the Wesleyan universities, to their graduating class, and he said, and I'm quoting here, "You can take your diploma, walk off this stage, and chase only after the big house and the nice suits and all the other things that our money culture says you should buy. You can choose to narrow your concerns and live your life in a way that tries to keep your story separate from America's, but I hope you won't." And then he went on to talk about the need to do public service, to pay back, and all of that usual rhetorical nonsense, as if going out and being a productive citizen is somehow not worthy of us. Isn't that what made America? People coming here, millions of immigrants, so they could be productive citizens, so they could make their own way and realize their own dreams to help their own families? And that's not enough for Barack Obama. We can't have that basis of a civil society. He says that that sort of thing betrays, and this is his words, a spiritual poverty. And that only thinks about these sorts of things. When asked about any faults that he might have had in the past, he said, well, I think I was too self-centered. And I had to get outside of myself. This is the rhetoric of this guy, but this is what this guy really deep down believes. And it's not just him. It's the pandering members of Congress and policymakers who go along with this kind of stuff. And you can see how those kinds of policies follow from this sort of collectivism, which Ayn Rand exposes in Atlas Shrugged. Finally, I want to mention the evasion of reality. Now again, we're going a level deeper here. In Atlas Shrugged, the villains, for example, say that they don't want to destroy property rights. They want to protect them, but they want to do it in kind of a new and modern and updated form. Well, what is that? For example, you saw in the Kalo Supreme Court case exactly this sort of thing. What happened was the city governments are allowed, sadly, to take land for so-called public use. And this has always traditionally been understood that if you need to put a road through, or if you need to put a government town hall or a police department or something, that's what it meant. Well, the interpretation of the city fathers in Connecticut were that, well, public use means that this property, it's somebody's home, and so they don't pay as high a taxes. Whereas if we, the city, condemn their home and bulldoze it and allow a business to put up a business there, we can tax them more. So isn't that a public use? And that's how they took the concept of property rights and twisted it around to evade the reality of the fact that they're simply thieves. And that's what they did, and sadly the Supreme Court upheld that sort of thing. When Barack Obama was asked whether he's a socialist by kind of a very shy reporter who didn't want to offend him, right? Barack Obama just said, well, of course not. It's a silly question. I don't want to control the economy. You know, not only at the time that he was controlling the banks and the auto industries, but that he's laying his plans to control the entire healthcare industry. This is a massive evasion of reality. Okay? Or look at the use of the terms bailout and stimulus. The bailout, supposedly under Bush, was just to deal with the toxic assets, toxic real estate assets that a lot of banks held that were bringing the system down. And immediately, that became a slush fund for every other thing you could dream of. Look at the so-called stimulus package, the evasion of reality using that word. Stimulus, traditionally, whether I like it or not, means spending on certain kind of things that immediately create jobs. Maybe you have a road program just ready to go, picks ready to go into the ground, you spend the money and at least people are put to work. Stimulus in this sense basically meant, you've probably seen the long lists of nonsense that this stuff is, you know, for turtle farms and God knows what other kind of idiot stuff. And a lot of the money isn't spent until the out years because he wanted this as a slush fund to help nationalize education as well as health care. What's the term investment mean? There's another good Orwellian term that evades reality. They speak of all of this spending that they want to do as investment, right? But take a look in Atlas Shrugged also at the scene in which the bad guys are explaining to Hank Rearden the steel unification plan, and how this plan basically pays everyone runs their businesses like normal, and then they put all their money into a pool, and then the ones with the most furnaces basically get paid the most. And the ones with the fewer furnaces, of course, get paid the least on a furnace-by-furnace basis. Sounds very rational, doesn't it? Except for the fact that Hank Rearden has fewer furnaces, and each of his furnaces turn out 3 times as much steel as the other guys who have many, many, many furnaces, most of them laying idle and turning out very little. And Rearden is struck especially by, how do you guys think you're going to get away with this? This is nonsense. Don't you know that you're simply destroying the industry? And they're sitting there and they're talking like this. And this evasion of reality, aside from the fact it's a dumb economic program, that you just have to be aghast at it. Well, isn't that exactly what Barack Obama and Congress is doing when they're saying, well, we're going to simply spend $3 trillion. Where are you going to get that $3 trillion? Blank out. It's this evasion of reality. It's this kind of postmodern politics where if you just think it, and if you can just make a good PR effort on it, then it's real. And don't worry, people aren't going to think about the day after tomorrow. You know, there's a scene in Atlas Shrugged, you'll recall, where Dagny asks, how do you expect this railroad unification plan to work? And asks, I think it was Cuffy Meggs, you know, what are you going to do the day after tomorrow? And the answer is something like, the day after tomorrow we'll all be dead anyway, you know. Amazing. So again, Atlas shows not only the economic silliness that parallels today, it shows the moral silliness and the moral carnage that we see today, and finally the evasions of reality on which all of this must be based. When you talk to these people, you feel like slapping them and saying, wake the hell up, what the hell's the matter with you? And I would like to see more people doing that. Now I've kind of probably, I try to do that in my op-eds, and anyway. But I wanted to leave you with something positive, now that I've thoroughly depressed you and shown you why people really are looking to Atlas Shrugged today, because Rand was such a prescient thinker. I want to say a few good things. I want to talk now about Atlas and the promise of tomorrow. Atlas also shows us what is possible. We see little glimpses of it and bigger glimpses of it. In Atlas Shrugged, for example, we show various characters who are just thirsting for the sight of human achievement in the middle of all of this economic mess and carnage. The best example is that on the first run of the John Galt line, people are lining the railroad tracks with flags and fireworks and cheering, because my gosh, as everything is falling apart, here's achievement before us against all odds. Rand shows that in Atlas, and I think we have that sort of thirst in this country still. You see that in the trial of Hank Rearden, for disobeying the laws of the realm, that he won't play the game. He calls them on it. He says, look, you put me in a, I don't recognize your right to try me on this. I don't recognize your right to anything. He calls their premises. And they essentially render a verdict of, well, we know someone else did it, so we're not going to punish you. And because they backed off. And you see people cheering. Or, for example, when Dagny Taggart goes on the radio show supposedly to talk about the wonders of these government plans, right? And she basically says, well, here's the story. What happened was they tried to extort Hank Reardon, and they immediately cut the microphone off, because she's basically saying they're just a bunch of extortionists. And what happens when she gets in the taxi cab afterwards, and she hears the static that the cabbie has obviously been listening to the trial, or listening to the radio address, I should say, and listening to Dagny Taggart. And when Dagny gives the cab driver a tip, the cabbie says, thank you. And it's not just for the tip, it was for what Dagny did, that she called them on it. And so you see in Atlas these kinds of examples. And again, you see that today when some of the more vocal spokespeople call them on it. The British, I can't remember the guy's name, a British lawmaker. Yeah, Hannon, right. Basically called him on it and called Obama on it, and just, instead of being diplomatic and the normal kind of stuff, he said, this is just crap. And it got on YouTube, and many of you have probably already seen it. When you call people on it, it's a very, very powerful thing, and Atlas Shrugged shows us that. Remember when the scene when Floyd Ferris is trying to extort the steel from Hank Reardon, and Hank Reardon says, well, surely you must be disappointed because, after all, I disobeyed one of your laws. And he says, why do you think we make them? There's no way you can obey our laws. We know we make them so that you're bound to disobey the laws, and that's how we have you, right? And that's, of course, the sort of situation that we have in this country. There is no way anyone can understand the laws of the United States. Take the tax laws. There is no way that the Secretary of the Treasury can understand the tax laws, right? It is impossible. So the government has you, but when you call them on it, that's very powerful, as Rand shows in Atlas Shrugged. Of course, in Atlas you see people quitting rather than becoming slaves. And of course, what do you see in America today? You see tea parties from coast to coast as people say, we've had enough of this and we're going to be vocal about it. But the final thing I want to leave you with in Atlas Shrugged is you see the example of Galt's Gulch. You see a society of achievers. You see a society of people who love their own lives, who are excited about their own lives, whatever it is that they're doing. And you see these people pursuing their own rational self-interest and their own happiness in a peaceful and harmonious way. Not peace and harmony brought about by at the barrel of a gun, a government gun, but peace and harmony of achievers who trade with one another, and a society in which everybody can benefit. I think that that's the most powerful example that you see in Atlas Shrugged. And some of you probably heard me say it before, but the path to the kind of society worth preserving is one in which we all pursue the things we love, whether you're nurturing a business to profitability or a child to maturity, whether you're writing a song or a poem or a business plan or a dissertation, whether you're laying the bricks to a building or designing it or arranging for this finance, these are all acts of creation that you should be proud of. And if everybody pursued their own self-interest in that way, doing the things that they love, we'd have a society in which we would all profit, we would all be educated, enlightened, enriched, and inspired by the actions of our fellows. I think that that's the most powerful thing you can take away from Atlas Shrugged. So we've come a long way with people looking at the analogies between Atlas and the world today. I think we should take it the next step further and really make a push at the moral foundations of what's going on in society today and say we have to stand up for self-interest, as I've just described it, as Rand describes it, because I think for young people who really care about their careers, who really care about their future, who are really thirsting for something, Rand offers that in Atlas Shrugged, and I hope that we all take that lesson away when we go out of this room and go back into away out of this Galt's Gulch. We want to make that a Galt's Gulch out there in the rest of the world. Thank you for your attention. Okay.
I hate to start this out on a pessimistic note. Excuse me.
Half of my talk was pessimistic, so I will.
I look around, and we all probably are going to go back to our jobs next week.
Right.
And what I'm wondering is, why aren't we shrugging? Why aren't we helping it fall down? Because I see that as the message in Atlas Shrug is, you're not going to stop it by making a radio address, because they're going to turn you off. You're not going to stop it by standing up for a tea party, because they're just not going to listen to you. The best way to do it is hit it where it hurts. Take their tax revenue away.
Well, the answer is several-fold. First of all, remember, Ayn Rand has said that she didn't write Atlas Shrugged because she wanted it to happen. She wrote Atlas Shrugged because she didn't want it to happen. It was an object lesson. She didn't want society to fall apart and collapse. And that's why she wrote it. And I think most people realize that. But the second thing is just the practicability, quite frankly, okay? I'm for doing things that work. I'm not an American pragmatist, I'm a real pragmatist. And frankly, I don't think it would work. You know, there are other attempts to do similar sorts of things. For example, there's a Free State attempt for all sort of libertarians and freedom-minded people to move up to New Hampshire. I'd like to see that succeed, okay? But so far, too few people have been willing to move up to the colds of New Hampshire in order to control that state for freedom-minded people. It just doesn't work. So in that sense, the best option number 2 would be to do what I say. Now, by the way, it also means that whenever you can avoid, for example, helping the looters, if it's in your personal interest. Again, there are medical doctors I know who just said, I'm sick of putting my own butt on the line, with governments threatening me with high taxes, jail, et cetera, I'm just going to quit. So in those instances, they're doing it out of self-interest, not out of self-sacrifice. And I think that would be the answer. Yeah.
Thank you. Did I understand you correctly that the current economic crisis has led to an uptick in sales of Atlas Shrugged? And can you quantify that for us?
I don't have the numbers right here. They've been discussed in other panels. I know that at one point earlier this year, Atlas was #1 on the Amazon. I think it was classical fiction. It had moved up to #1. I think remember, there are 3 versions of Atlas. There's the hardback version, and there's the big paperback version. I think there actually might be 4. And then there's this little paperback version. There's also a books on tape version of it. And so if you look online, if you just go to Amazon and look up the different versions. Marcia, does someone want to? Yeah.
Just the Centennial Edition is number 324 of all books.
Okay, the Centennial, for those, Marcia, why don't you go to the mic real quick, Marcia, if you have the numbers right offhand.
What someone here said the other day, which was that, I think Yaron Brook reported that by the end of that Atlas Shrugged had been selling 200,000 copies a year, and by the end of the year, if this keeps up, it'll be 600,000.
Yeah. Anyway, but the answer is yes, there has been an incredible uptick of Atlas Shrugged sales. You can check it out on Amazon and the various places. And as I say, it's amazing, I think I said this in my earlier talk, to look at the tea parties coast to coast and to see the signs. I was standing in front of the White House. Barack's house is right there in front of us. Sadly, he wasn't in there to hear what we were saying. And there's like a sign that said, the name's Galt, John Galt. And Atlas will shrug, and all sorts of other very Randian signs. And throughout the country, we have in our logbook, which is the monthly the quarterly publication that our members get. Everyone should become a member. And remember, no check is too large. You'll get that. But we actually have photos that were sent to us by some of our friends around the country. So yes, there's quite an uptick.
One other fact that goes along with this is I think that it largely is was caused by this article in the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
Because it was out January 9th,
That's
and
right.
the sales started going up January 13th. And the bloggers
Yeah,
got
and by the way, just to give you more background, I mean, yes, Steve's piece came out January 9th, and what you saw is that week that was the most linked to piece of the Wall Street Journal for the period of I forget how many weeks. You saw commentators on the various news shows talking about it, mentioning John Galt. You saw Santelli's famous Tea Party thing from the floor of the Chicago Exchange, right? And so yeah, I think Steve's piece really did help launch it.
Oh, couple of comments. I want to say that in Atlas Shrugged, we all really resonated with it. We're all smart and we're sort of brainiacs here. But the one thing that would bother me through that book, which what about the Eddie Willers? What about the Cheryls? What about the other people?
Yeah.
They have a role too. They're valuable people, and we have not really spoken to them. We don't want them to read this book and think, oh well, what about me? I'm not Brainiac. And I think that's what's so exciting is that I went to a tea party yesterday, and there was a black man there who's a basic laborer type person who on his own had come to these ideas. And I'm saying what's really exciting is what you can do is say I was like, oh my gosh, that's so great that you came to this idea. And do you know about, and I gave him some websites, and he was all excited about it. To make people like that know that you are not alone. There's a whole movement of other people who really admire achievement, good work on any level, not just the intellectual. And the other thing is, when the society is rotting, there's an underground. Think of every other society. There's the resistance. There's the black market. There are people who will still trade with each other in communities that do not recognize what is being done to us.
Right. And by the way, I would add again, one of the lessons of you see in Atlas Shrugged is respect for all people based on their character, their achievements, what they have done. In the Fountainhead, one of Howard Roark's best friends is Mike, the electrician bricklayer, who basically is a redneck. But he'd rather hang around with this redneck, in a bar drinking beer than hang around with all of these top architects, who are a bunch of pretentious, snooty SOBs, right? And I think, and remember, the other thing, and this is again, Rand talked about the sort of the American spirit and the American sense of life, and this is another thing where there's an opportunity for us. The people I've described, the paternalists, the Obamas, the Pelosi's, and it can be the Republicans too. I've spent a lot of time bashing them as well. Paternalists basically believe that people are too stupid to know how to run their own lives, and their lives must be run by a ruling elite. Also, part of the logic of paternalism is that it infantilizes the population. The next issue of the New Individualist, which is probably at the press even as we speak, has a lot on how self-reliance has been undermined. I have an article in there. Again, subscribe to the New Individualist. Better yet, become a member of the Atlas Society, and you'll get it for free, or not for free, but part of your membership thing. That's just part of what the paternalists do. They have to create a stupid population, and government schools do that. That's why I mentioned earlier that government schools do a pathetic job of teaching civic, sort of civil history and so forth, an even worse job of teaching critical thinking, and they have to, because if you have people who are self-reliant and think for themselves and so forth, they don't need the government. And so we can appeal to people who say, do you want to be treated like somebody who can't wipe your nose or tie your shoes without the government? Are you that stupid or not? One of the things you've heard me probably say before is go into a room and let's say you're talking about vouchers or tax credits for people who send their kids to private schools as opposed to government schools. And you go to a crowd and you say, okay, now how many of you people think you're smart enough to buy a car without the government helping you? Everyone's going to say. How many think you can buy stereo equipment or widescreen TV without the government telling you which one to buy? How many of you think you can buy, go down the list. Okay, how many of you think you're too stupid to determine which school to send your kids to assuming you have access to ratings and systems. Let me see, hands of all those people who are too stupid. None of them will raise their hands. And by the way, one of the reasons why Barack Obama and his Congress wanted to get rid of the voucher system in Washington, D.C., which is mainly for poor black kids and for poor black families, is that they can't have competition. The government doesn't like competition, and and of course you'll note that many, many more people apply for those vouchers than can actually get them. The market is there. Poor black people, just like poor white people, most of them don't want their kids to grow up in poverty. They want their kids to succeed. And it's the government policies that keep them in their place, and there's a reason why the government policies have to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of quick comments. Okay. On Detroit as Starnesville, there's a website called Detroit Blog. It's been around for a couple of years. And it basically takes a tour through greater Detroit and shows you the neighborhoods where meadows and forests are taking over, and the buildings downtown that are now the dwelling place only of pigeons. It talks to the people who are still in some of these neighborhoods where hardly any houses are left and so on. There's no need for the federal government to send bulldozers to knock down Detroit. This has been going on now for a generation.
Yeah.
And it's sobering reading, but the people who are still in some of these neighborhoods have interesting stories to tell too. The other thing is about Eddie Willers, okay? Yeah, there is the strain in Ayn Rand's thought that I think we should be drawing attention to, like Rourke hanging out with Mike Donegan and so on. Mm-hmm. But there's also a strain in Atlas Shrugged, and I wrote about it in an essay a couple of years ago, where, sorry, Eddie, you're not a God hero. You're not allowed into Valhalla, okay? Mm-hmm. And, that's there. People are going to notice that when they read Atlas Shrugged. It's not what's most important. It's not what needs to be foregrounded now, but it is there, okay? And
yeah, I mean, I tend to think of that as Eddie Willers is portrayed as a perfectly decent guy. He certainly he's an achiever. He admires Reardon and others, but he doesn't understand what's going on, and that's the tragedy. And that's the thing that we can help is, our fellow Americans in many cases don't understand what's going on. We can provide that knowledge and information, and it can be through reading Atlas Shrugged, or it can be through simpler stuff. One of the things we're doing is, we're reworking a lot of our material so that it's much more easily accessible. And if you want to start here, you can start here, for not just academics, but for, regular people.
Right, but there's a degree of dependency in his psychology that you wouldn't normally expect to find in somebody of his level of achievement.
Well, again, I think it was a literary device, and I leave that for other debates.
Right.
Thanks.